Welcome back into One Winning Pod. We are fast approaching Ravens training camp and the start of preseason, which is pretty crazy to think about. We're about halfway through July and starting to look right now at the roster and, what are some changes that happened to it. And that's what we're going to be looking at tonight, is looking at some players that, we lost in this past offseason and looking at how the Ravens might replace them. What players from last year might have slightly different roles than they did in previous seasons in order to fill those roles. So to talk about it with us tonight, we have a very special guest on. Ken, you want to say hi?
Hi, Peter. I'm Ken. Ken McKusick of Filmstudy here.
I'm glad you threw that in because I was going to throw that in real quick. This is the Ken McKusick of Filmstudy.
Yeah, just a random Ken. No, I think it's fair to say you are the Ken of the Ravens community at this point.
I don't know. I mean, the Barbie movie is coming out soon, but I thought people weren't talking about that.
Ken Francis.
Oh man, yeah, that's a throwback right there. But yeah, we're definitely excited to come in and talk about these changing roles. And I think it first came up when Peter was doing an expectations show with you about Marcus Williams, rather.
Marcus. Yeah, that specific episode was Marcus Williams. And yeah, Ken, I think if you remember, we got off to a little bit of a tangent talking there on not just Marcus Williams, but one of the losses that the Ravens had this past offseason was Chuck Clark getting traded to the New York Jets. Unfortunately, won't be playing for the Jets this year due to injury. But yeah, Chuck Clark, huge part of this defense over the past couple years, played nearly 100% of the snaps for this defense. And, replacing a guy like that, of course, we drafted Hamilton and we got Geno Stone back there. So you're looking at this and, as we talked about, there is a little bit of a question there on exactly what the Ravens want to do. They're going to put Stone in that strong safety role and kind of still leave Hamilton in kind of that nickel spot that they had him in last year, which he was kind of forced into due to injuries, or they put him more back in that traditional role that they drafted him at. We're looking at that as that's a really big question right now. What is it that the Ravens are going to do to approach this first year without Clark over the past couple of years?
So outstanding player, Hamilton. So I think he's really the key to this whole thing is where will he play best? And I think that's the question the Ravens need to answer first, is where can they make Kyle Hamilton a superstar? So if you approach it from the standpoint of which player can they get on the field by putting Hamilton at the other spot, then you have a question of Geno Stone versus who else might be the nickel, which is probably Pepe Williams. And you might be very tempted to say Stone over Williams based on last year's play. I think Stone came in and played very well for Marcus Williams, and Pepe Williams did not play particularly well in his opportunities in the slot. Although I didn't kill his opportunities. The Ravens are certainly going to keep him, but he didn't play as well as Stone did. But I think that's the wrong way to answer that question, is just to look at that. You're looking at the minutia and letting the tail wag the dog, so to speak. I think it really has to come down to where can Kyle Hamilton be a superstar, and his placement of him has to come first. You should have the least possible risk of him having, Kemalai Correa, Michael Orr disease of moving around position to position and never getting one role set. So I hope that's the way they decide it, and I hope they'll figure what that spot is for Hamilton long term. It could be nickel, but I think it's more likely that they'll decide it's strong safety.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Ken. I think how I kind of look at that too is I think having Hamilton is kind of a unique situation here, right? Because we think that he could be so good at either of these positions. I feel like that was probably a part of the Ravens draft strategy this year of not really going corner early on and really only picking up some guys at the tail end of the draft. I think because of that, like, he can fill those two roles. The Ravens can probably find a configuration that is still with question marks. There's a reason why we're talking about this position group kind of as a whole. The secondary is not the strongest that it's been, particularly over like some of the secondaries over the last couple of years, where you have, Marlon, you have Marcus, you could throw in like Brandon Carr in the mix, and a lot of those guys, like, there have been a lot stronger secondaries. But that being said, Hamilton's biggest value, I think, is flexibility and positional versatility. And so, yeah, I feel like that had to have been part of the formula here. But I agree. I would be excited, I think, if Pepe got significant snaps from the slot. Like you said, I don't think he had a great season last year. There are obviously some things that you want to have back. But I felt like if I look at the play that he had versus a guy like Jalen Armour-Davis, I feel like Pepe showed some good things. I feel like he was generally sticky with his guys. I think he showed some ball skills. I think he made some gambits, I guess, from time to time and failed, which is, obviously why his play wasn't that good. But I felt like I saw enough that I'd be like, okay, I could see him taking on a role similar to last year, maybe adding a couple more snaps. Obviously, I'd like to have a guy better at that role, more solid, but I think he would be an interesting piece to kind of grow into over the next couple of years at that slot position.
JAD is fairly far behind the others in terms of his just experience at cornerback and where he is. He's still, hands and feet almost. You can count his games that he's played at the college or pro level in terms of cornerback. Shut down after the third game and some really bad play against New England. There was, some injuries that went in there, but he could have been back and did come back for a special teams role in one game. Does not seem to me like he's even a guarantee to make the team. But on the other hand, I don't know. The Ravens are it's very unusual that they'll actually cut a player they draft in the fourth round in the second year. So we'll have to see how that works out. Pepe's in a similar position. He's just a little ahead of him on the depth chart. And because the Ravens have more outside corners than slot guys, Pepe has probably a better chance to derive that starting role. But it's not a great group of corners. And you look at it all the way down the list in terms of Trayvon Mullen has a guaranteed contract. So he's probably going to make the team, I would think. It's not a huge loss. It's only about $1 million if they don't keep him. But it's not a sunk cost in the traditional sense that the four of us would think of it, because they have to actually replace him with a player who's making $700,000 to $1 million. So that money will actually be lost and double paid if they cut him. So they're probably not going to do that. And then they have other players like Worley is still around. Brandon Stevens could still move back to the outside. So Marcus Peters could be back. I think that's something a lot of people are still hoping for. But they have other options. It's none of them are particularly great. And cornerback depth looks extremely weak right now.
It's interesting how a few years of questionable drafting at the corner position has led to this. Never forget Shaun Wade. I was very excited when we drafted him. And then he got traded away before he even really had a chance to show much, even in preseason play. So then, he was gone, and that was no longer an option. I thought he could have been a slot option for us. Then you had Pepe, obviously, and JD last year, who didn't really perform at a level that, you felt comfortable playing them, particularly I think that's the issue when we talk about this, is like this is a playoff Super Bowl aspirational team. The base defense these days is the nickel. You really want to have a really good player in that slot as a starter.
Yeah, Stevens was the other guy who got drafted. Very questionable draft pick where he was picked.
True.
And obviously it wasn't a great year for the draft by a lot of people. So a lot of people out for COVID and whatnot. But still, they've also kind of messed him up a little bit by moving him around. So he's already got Camelot-Correa disease to a little bit. He played pretty well at the end of last year at corner. A lot of the grabbiness was early, got rid of some of the penalties. Fairly sticky player, does sometimes get beat at the top of the stem, but I think still had the speed and the size certainly to play that position. And if you look at the Ravens cornerbacks and just how darn weak they are overall, I mean, right now it looks like Worley could be the third cornerback for this team. And I don't know that's the way it's going to work out, but if Worley could be, then you probably want players like Stevens sticking on the outside and not moving them back to safety.
It's interesting that we're talking here about the depth, and you have to wonder. I think I do agree that the Ravens will try and put Hamilton in the strong safety role to start the year. That is where he was drafted to be. He's projected to be a phenomenal talent at that position. But while we're talking about the lack of depth that we have, you do wonder if we're looking like week 4 or 5 into the season, and that position is a big weakness for this team. And, you're giving up a lot of yards there. Are the Ravens tempted to move Hamilton back to that position where they did see him have success last year? Because we do know Geno Stone, played very solidly last year. Kind of by default is the best 7th round pick in Ravens history. You do know that he is someone there that you can rely on, while he does have his shortcomings as well. But then, we're also talking about, would that be the best move for Hamilton? Like, we're talking about how moving around some of these other young guys kind of stunted their growth a bit. It really feels like that's a move that we wouldn't really want to be forced into doing. Kind of, have Hamilton take on that responsibility of what he was drafted to be as soon and as often as we can, rather than having to move him around to kind of right the ship, for lack of a better term.
They have done it with superstars in the past at other positions, Marshall Yanda being the big one, finishing a season at left guard when he had an injury to his left shoulder, and playing at right tackle a year in 2010 when Gaither went down and Orr had to move to left tackle. So it certainly has been done with star players, and there it's less of a problem, I think, in terms of, and I honestly believe it would be less of a problem with Hamilton. I just want them to be cognizant of it, because making him a superstar is job one on this defense. He's probably the most important player on the entire defense in terms of variance of result for this year. So I don't think there's not as much variance with players like Roquan or Humphrey, is what I'm basically saying. Owe could be another one that could be in that group, but Kyle Hamilton could be close to a defensive player of the year, or he could be a guy who all of a sudden he's playing safety and doesn't know what he's doing, or has problems with positioning, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I do find it curious, because my hunch is that the Ravens' disposition is going to be to get the best 11. The case that you weren't looking for. Looking for the best 11 to play most downs, to have the most consistent defense. Because I'm wondering if the cost benefit of the superstar level of Hamilton, like, can he be a superstar if your slot corner is getting peppered? That's like kind of the question I think they might have going into the season.
A legitimate question. And if he, it does not have to be one role with Hamilton. If the other team's in 12 personnel and you want to keep the nickel out there to cover it, Hamilton can move up to be opposite the tight end who is split, and Stone can be on the back end. And you obviously, defense changes second, so you can react to an offensive personnel grouping that way. And then when they send out 11, you want Hamilton back on the back end. You want Pepe Williams in for Stone on those cases. So if you do have the option to make these changes, but I would prefer something where the number of defensive backs dictates what you're doing with Kyle Hamilton. I think there's less chance of things going wrong if that's the case. I don't have a problem if with 4 defensive backs he's on the back end, and with 5 he moves to a nickel role, and that way you're ensured of, by the way, getting him on the field for every single snap, which that's very important, because he really needs to be out there as much as possible.
Yeah, that's my hunch. Honestly, if I had to guess right now, Hamilton will be, if there's 4 safety, if there's 5 nickel. That's just my hunch, because I honestly don't think that's. I personally think he can have equal impact doing that, but we'll see. It is cool how close to the line of scrimmage he can get. And I'm also curious, if we're talking about changing responsibilities, with Chuck Clark no longer wearing the green dot, and the safety no longer wearing the green dot and going to Roquan, it almost can change where your safety is. Like, they don't have to be as close to the line of scrimmage. I felt like Chuck had to be a little bit closer in for that reason.
Yeah, he played on the back end of plenty of cover 2, so I don't think that's necessarily true. The Ravens had it called from free safety on a couple different occasions with Eric Weddle, and a long time ago with Eric Turner. So they have done that with free safeties before. It's definitely not preferred. And they never tried it with Ed Reed. I mean, Ed Reed always, for one thing, was always playing with Ray Lewis, so it wasn't really an issue. But the one time that they took the green dot away from Ray Lewis when he was actually healthy, they gave it to Jim Leonard, and he was the guy for 3 games in the 2008 playoffs. Never really heard a good explanation for that, by the way. But it is typically it's a strong safety might be the most common place to have the green dot right now. But the Mike linebacker, strong safety, third is the will, and fourth would be the free safety. And those are really the only positions that can have it.
Moving on to another position. At the moment, Justin Houston is a free agent. He's obviously on the team the past 2 years, provided a huge veteran presence to a fairly young group of pass rushers. Like we're talking about Marcus Peters, completely within the realm of possibility that he could re-sign with the Ravens, but right now we're operating under the assumption that he will not be there. And I think this is an interesting one to look at because, like I alluded to, we signed Houston for his veteran presence, and when you look at the pass rushers that are there, Bowser's a vet, of course. He had not as good of a season as usual last year, but he was coming back from the injury, so that was expected. But we got a lot of questions with Odafe Owe and David Ojabo. Both of them have potential, obviously. They flashed a little bit, but still, you look at that group and you still have questions about what that full potential is going to be. So it will be interesting to see, will the Ravens just hold with these guys, or are they going to bring in another vet? If it's not Houston, I'll be honest, I don't know who else is out there right now. I haven't kept close tabs on that. But yeah, seeing this group of guys go out there without having that vet guy that you can fall back on and who had given us, some additional pressures in the past season, I think that's something else to look out for.
One of the things they've been trying to do, or you hear on Twitter anyway, is everybody wants the rush linebackers. And the problem with the Ravens right now is that they have no depth at Sam. Mm-hmm. And they need a strong side linebacker. Some coverage responsibilities would be attributable. And he also needs to eat early down run snaps that will take some of this load off Tyus Bowser. Now, they could move Owe back over there, but I'm really not in favor of that. He's one of the players who did not do well with a multi-position responsibility this last year. And I think if you just leave him on the rush side, let him work with Chuck Smith, improve the get off, improve his compound moves, I think you get to get a much better performance out of that. Ojabo will split those snaps with him. He'll also kick inside on some pass rush downs. JPP was a good choice. I think he doesn't give you much in coverage, but he has a awareness over there, and it stops the run pretty well. I think we saw a good player last year. He'd be a fine re-signing if they got him. Houston is a pure rush linebacker. So if they have Houston on the roster, along with Owe and Ojabo, you really have kind of too many rush guys. Now, it wouldn't seem that way if they had an injury, but right now it seems like that's a lot at once. And then Tavius Robinson, it's not obvious to me that he'll be anything but a situational pass rusher as a rookie. So we'll see where he ends up, or if in camp they try and give him some Sam responsibilities and see how he does with that.
Yeah, I think this position group to me seemed like an obvious. There needs to be another piece here that isn't on the roster currently to really fill this out. I think it's a great point, Ken. Although even on the rush side, I know personally, I'm pretty excited for Ojabo. I think he showed a little bit of flashes last year. I think I'm really looking forward to having him with another full off season healthy to be able to get to his form. I think he was a really exciting player coming out of Michigan that could really do some stuff for us on the rush side. But it's a big question mark, at least on the rush side for sure. But yeah, I agree with you. Even if Bowser's your main guy on the other side, you really don't have any more names over there. So I think for me, this is probably, out of all the position groups that we're going to talk about today, I think this is the one I'm worried the most about. I need to look a little bit more into this to see what names are going to be on the market, but I would probably imagine that the Ravens bring in somebody closer to training camp, or maybe like a camp cut to be able to get another piece in this group.
I think it's interesting that last year we had, 3 different guys that could have played Sam, but they all had Achilles problems. I don't know if Beagle is okay in his recovery timeline. I know today reports came out that we're talking to DeJuan Smoot, potentially to come in for a visit and play defensive end for us. So he had his injury later in the season. So I would think that Beagle might be an option for us if his recovery is going well and they think he's good to go.
Smoot played in a 4-3 last year, but he only had a handful of total snaps that were using coverage, 15 or less. And so they wouldn't depend on him for that, I don't think.
I agree.
But on the other hand, they may see something that they say, hey, we think we can turn this guy into a Sam. That's always possible. So one of the things about Sam linebackers is you don't know who they are when they come out of college, because those guys are too valuable as pass rushers, generally speaking, if they're going to play in the NFL, to be used very much in coverage anyway. And so you end up having to look for traits and having to figure out who could be the guy who would be a good coverage player at the NFL level. And they are very hard to find.
Yeah, and I think Tretz, the middle linebacker we drafted, he's too light in the pants to play at Sam.
Simpson?
Yeah,
yes.
Simpson. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see him as an edge rusher at all. They may, you can have him on as a second edge on a side, the way they might put Hamilton or Humphrey or anybody else up there, but I wouldn't think he'd be trying to beat a tackle one-on-one.
Right, I agree.
Yeah.
I think we can also throw out there as well, some people I think are calling for kind of trading for Chase Young. I think the Washington, I don't even remember their name anymore. Whatever the team from Washington is. Yeah.
Oh, man. For now, since they don't have the copyright, right?
Yeah. Anyway, I think that's a little bit of buzz, I think, behind that in terms of them not being as happy with his performance and some of his injuries. I think that's sort of the big red flag with Chase Young right now. And a couple of people I think are calling for us to make a trade there. It's intriguing, I guess, maybe for the potential, but honestly, I think a lot of people are suggesting maybe to trade Patrick Queen in that trade. Knowing where Queen is right now, I'm not really sure if that trade makes a whole lot of sense. You're taking a gamble for sure. And, at this point, I think even though, Queen has also been inconsistent, I feel like he has been trending up. So, I'm not entirely sure how I feel about that move.
Be an exchange of 1-year rentals. So both of them are on their last year of their rookie deal. And it's the kind of trade that it could make sense if it makes sense to Washington. I don't know why it would make sense to them, because they've got the same issue with re-signing Queen, probably moving him back to Mike linebacker if they want to keep him. And it doesn't seem like a particularly exciting thing, but they may have already decided they don't want Chase Young either. So, maybe a case of just an exchange of 1-year rentals.
Yeah, true. And then I think at the Ravens side, you'd have to be really confident that Simpson would be ready to take over that role for Queen, because again, like we're talking about, we're expecting this to be Queen's last year in Baltimore. You still need that position filled for this run, if you're going for a Super Bowl. And we've seen in the past how having an inexperienced player there, or just someone who's not up for the task, can really have a cascading effect on the defense. So, I mean, that said, it's an interesting thought. I guess hadn't been in tune with Twitter enough. This is the first I'm hearing of anyone floating that, but yeah, I think I kind of agree. I don't see the upside for Washington to even pursue that personally, but you never know. Washington certainly a franchise that has surprised in the past, so who knows?
I think moving on to another position group we're looking at here is the departure with Calais Campbell moving on to the Atlanta Falcons. Trying to look at who's going to replace him. Now, obviously, I think Calais is a very unique player. One, obviously been around the league a very long time, the most tenured defensive player in the league, I believe, at this point. And, he not only brings a lot of flexibility to the table. I think I remember talking to you, Ken, might have been in our show about Calais and his role, but he can play at a number of different spots. The body type to be able to play snaps on special teams as well. So there's a lot, I think, that he brings to the table. But that said, this is a position group where right now, at least for the main role that Calais kind of fills, I think that there are some guys here that, I'd feel a little bit comfortable with. Guys like Matabuke, Broderick Washington, even Travis Jones kind of stepping up, not in the same position group, but sort of just, elevating their play in their position to be able to cover for such a big loss here.
I've got some fairly complex thoughts that pull together the whole defensive line. Should I just go ahead with that if you guys don't mind?
Yeah, for sure.
there's a lot of snaps missing from the Ravens defense with Calais Campbell gone. Compounding that problem is the fact that the Ravens will probably play in total more defensive snaps this season because of Monken's offensive system. So you play a faster paced offense, you're going to end up playing more defensive snaps as well. 1996 Ravens had a remarkable no-huddle offense led by Testaverde, 3 good wide receivers, Michael Jackson and Derek Alexander, and they could really move the ball down the field very quickly. But the problem was they couldn't put that stress on their defense. At the same time, the defense had moved from a 4-3 to a 3-4 during the season due to injury, which is about as bad as it gets, guys. The only other team I know from Baltimore ever did that was the 1981 Colts, who are one of the worst defensive teams of all time. That same situation here for the Ravens could hit. And the Ravens' starting depth is pretty good. Madubuike, Washington, Jones, and Pierce are good players. The problem is if anybody gets hurt, you really go way down. And, Brent Urban will be available as a fifth defensive lineman. I'm assuming he makes the team. I think it's likely. Angelo Blackson might be the number 6 guy right now, and that's very weak. So, you'd hope he is retained on the practice squad. And the other thing, I guess the only mitigating factor that I see to this is that the Ravens will probably, because they have a decent amount of bodies at outside linebacker and can activate 5 on a given week when they want to, assuming they sign one more guy, that they will find a way to kick more guys inside. So if I'm looking to fill right around 2.0 snaps per play, that means those 4 guys have to approximate something, or maybe we call it 5 guys, have to approximate something like 40% of the snaps each. Urban's going to be substantially below that. He was 20% or thereabouts last year. He has had big years in the past, but I don't expect him at this point in his career to come back with more snaps. Madubuike played 59% last year. No way in hell should that happen again, because he really played not as well when he played a lot of snaps, and he played not as well in the second half. Both those things are telling me reduce workload, less is more. Broderick Washington, he could maybe play a few more snaps. I think he was at 43% last year, but I wouldn't expect him to go over somewhere between 45 and 50. So the big guy they're really depending on is the only guy who's signed for 24, who is Travis Jones. And I think the key thing for him is, how do they get him in as something other than a nose tackle? Because if he plays nose only, there aren't enough snaps for him probably to be in there. For starters, Michael Pierce also plays nose. But if he plays a combination of 1 and 3, and he's on the field for a lot of 3-tech snaps with Michael Pierce, not only do I think the Ravens would get very good run defense out of that, but I think that potentially alleviates a lot of their snap count problems by getting Jones in there for many more snaps than he otherwise would be in there as just a nose tackle.
I completely anticipate that. I think Travis Jones is going to play a lot of 3-tech this year. Not just because of the snap count problem, but I think he has the skill set to do it and do it at a high level. So I'm pretty excited about that. And I also think this is the cool position group because we'll get a lot of tells from preseason. I'm not sure if we'll have an idea of what they're doing with the defense from a secondary perspective from preseason. I guess we'll have some more confidence in slot corner potentially. But I think we're going to be taking a very close look in preseason at who these 5th, 6th, 7th defensive linemen, practice squad guys are, because that is completely up for grabs. And knowing how defensive line is with injuries, they're going to get used at some point in this season. Mm-hmm. They always are. So obviously, losing Calais and not adding anybody, I guess you could almost say you're adding Michael Pierce because he barely played last year. But without adding anybody, it leaves a big hole as far as how these snaps are going to get distributed.
Yeah. Well, and then, also, unfortunately, adding Michael Pierce is not a guarantee, as we know. Yeah, he's getting up there in age and hasn't played terribly many games recently. But yeah, I mean, I agree with everyone that everyone's saying. It's a big year for Travis Jones to step up here. A great opportunity for him. In some ways, it reminds me of 2015 when the first year without Haloti Ngata, Brandon Williams had to come in, and I mean I think he was starting some games in 2014, so it wasn't as big a jump as Brandon Williams was second year. Jones was a rookie last year, but I think there are some parallels there. What you're seeing there, you had a guy, obviously Nada was drafted by the Ravens, was here for longer. Campbell, vet guy, so it's not exactly the same, but similar in that way. A young guy, not established in the NFL very much at all, having to pick up and take that role where there was a hole filled by an established vet. And Brandon Williams, I know that some fans had issues with the contract that he was eventually given with his role, but I think he stepped up and did what was asked of him, and filled that role in the way that he could with his skill set. So great opportunity here for Jones to do the exact same thing.
Yeah, Brandon Williams was a hell of a player, and it was Pierce's rookie year when he was a UDFA that he came in and he played most of the nose tackle snaps and moved Brandon Williams to 3-tech. And so a lot of people thought Brandon Williams was still a nose tackle at that time, which was funny because you just got to look at the film a little bit, and he's the guy's lined up over center or over the shoulder to center. But I think that it was not as easy a transition for Williams as I anticipate it will be for Jones. Williams was not that great one-on-one penetrator versus a guard. I really am expecting that for Jones. And I know you were probably alluding to that earlier when you say you thought he has the skill set to do that well, right, Alec?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Do we think that this is a position group where maybe it does make sense? Would there be any options to be able for the Ravens to bring in around training camp?
The size and shape pool is not as large here as you might hope, because you got to be an athlete and you got to be very big. And they have guys. They have UDFAs on the roster currently, Trey Botts and Kaim Caesar and a couple guys. They may have one more, but those two guys come to mind immediately, who are definitely possibilities to either make the team if there's a depth breakdown of any sort, or to make the practice squad and be available if there's a depth breakdown later. So, but as far as is it likely there'll be other players cut? The problem is the Ravens are usually deeper at the position, and it's usually their practice squad getting poached. So if you're talking about Rashad Nichols or somebody like that still being around, yeah, those guys all could be around to start the season. One of the phenomena I talk about on my show once in a while is how the replacement level at all positions, but particularly at the size and shape positions that are extreme, degrades significantly over the course of the season. So try and pick up a left tackle at the start of the season. It's very difficult, and you'll trade a lot for it. Try and pick up a left tackle in December, and you're making all sorts of compromises to do it. Same thing goes if you try and pick up a cornerback. Look at the pool that's left in December. It's really defensive line is one of the positions. Injuries pile up, and you have problems with people missing games, obviously, but the players that are still available tend to be weaker as the season goes along, pretty significantly.
It does make me wonder. You mentioned that in 24 we don't have anyone outside of Jones on contract. Mm-hmm. It's very interesting that the Ravens made no attempt this season during the draft. I mean, I know they're really going to lean on these UDFAs. I feel like it really increases the importance of a UDFA breaking out because, I mean, shoot, they're going to have to spend so much capital or draft pipeline to fix this problem next year. They're just completely unprepared, and we've actually seen it for years. Like we've been saying for years, they need to draft more people, and then they got Jones, and we're like, well, that's a start, So it's interesting that we're at this spot now.
Yeah. Well, particularly because I feel like a few seasons ago, like between 2016, 2020-ish, the discussion was that they got to start drafting other players too. I feel like wasn't there a pretty big backlog where we were drafting a good bit of defensive linemen?
I'm trying to. I have to go through that. Like Chris Wormley was drafted in 2016. I don't have my Ravens draft list up here at present, but I have to go to it.
You'd have Kafusi, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Oh, there were a good bit of busts in there too. So I mean, I think that's another part that where they're not names that come off the tip of the tongue. But yeah, you had Wormley, and Zach Sealer.
Yeah, that was a good one. That away.
Yep.
Dylan Mack.
Oh yeah, the Mack.
Project Washington in 2020. Yeah.
Willie Henry was earlier.
Yeah, Willie Henry's a good one. The 2020 they had 2 draft picks, and they're both pending free agents now. Is the issue? Yeah. Both of them, either of them could be signed to a right price contract, but one of them really has to believe, at least one of them needs to believe there's some divisible benefit actually on the table. And that's the problem with year three guys. Sometimes they just want to bet on themselves. And I can't blame either Broderick Washington or Matabifke for doing that. And if you think about it, if Travis Jones is going to take some significant 3-tech snaps this year, either of those guys may say, this isn't the perfect place for me. Because they'll lose 3-tech snaps. Matabike, I think, will win from the exchange. He'll lose early down 3-tech snaps. He'll gain passing down 3-tech snaps. His opportunity to get pressures and sacks is going to be higher, and I would think that'll be better for him in the long run. He has to play less run defense. But the Ravens did pass up some opportunities. These have been very lean defensive line years in the draft as a whole, and the Ravens passed up some significant players in terms of making a pick. They took the fullback Mason instead of taking a Chris Tonga or some other players who were available in that draft. It was not a great draft of defensive linemen, but that was a name you could have had as a backup nose tackle. They didn't take Christian Barmore when they had the chance.
Oh yeah.
And he was a guy I really liked. I thought he'd be high on the Ravens' radar, but they took Owe and Bateman that year.
Bateman,
yeah. Not bad picks. Neither of them, both of them look like they'll be okay. Christian Barmore looks really good though.
It makes me wonder if the Ravens have confidence in their ability to fill that position through free agency, and they are confident that their dollars spent there can be well spent, if that makes sense. If they spend $5 million on that position, they get the expected value out of it, and it's always an option there for them. Whereas with the primo positions, they're like much more interested at trying to get the value out of the rookie contract, like the wide receiver and an edge rusher.
Very good point. I absolutely agree. I think that they probably also feel like they have a better chance with a UDFA player on the defensive line as well. Kind of like they had an arrogance over their ability to find UDFA linebackers that lasted forever.
Yeah,
not undeserved. It was probably correct with McLean and Ellerby and Scott, all producing at a very high level. But anyway, they on the defensive line, they're a well coached team. I think that's going to be one of the places. We talked about this a little bit on the show, but when you don't have cap dollars to spend, how do you do the most you can with what you have? And that might be spending money on position coaches and really getting more value out of the players you have that way when there's just no more cap.
Yeah, spending money on coaches, I think, is a big thing. And also, I was hearing The Athletic was doing an article or a show about the spending money on like health and strength training departments. Apparently, those are remarkably lean departments in NFL organizations. And the teams that are spending more on that now are seeing dividends as far as like player health. Apparently, the Rams had a breakthrough in player health for a couple of years there, and their guy got poached away, I think, by the Bills, if I recall correctly, or maybe it was the Cowboys. I forget. But they're starting to become a little bit of a renaissance in the weight room. And it was also apparently not uncommon. This is like a former player talking. It's not uncommon to go to a team and like everyone had the same lifting plan, which is something people were complaining about with Saunders. And that's like a little hard to believe that these guys aren't more specialized at this point. So that might be the next place that dollars are spent across the league. Like we saw a wave of analytics hitting the league, and everyone was deciding, we should invest in an analytics department. We should do something there. It might next be, actually weight room, which is I honestly find stunning. Wasn't a part of like where money was spent on these teams.
It's interesting because the technology definitely exists. I had a couple of Brazilian guys on the show talking about how you measure heat by muscle group kind of thing. And they do it for soccer, and they had some South American soccer teams signed up with them. But I would think if you put people through a standard lifting program or maybe through some other regimen to test them, you might be able to tell from muscle heat where their muscles are getting stressed the most, and try and build the lifting program to build up those muscle groups maybe that are weaker, if in fact that's what that even means.
Sure.
But you understand what I'm saying is there probably should be somewhere to test for what muscle groups need to be advanced.
Well, they were saying in the show, I thought it was really interesting, like it's basically asking the players to do one more 10-minute thing that like they're already getting asked to do a lot of different things. And like, where are you stealing that time from, quote unquote? But I do think it's incredibly advantageous for all involved. I think players love to be healthy. They love to be able to play more and have availability and give value to their team, so they can not only play longer and also probably earn a better contract from all that. So I think it's a win-win-win for everybody involved. Definitely curious how this will proceed. Yeah. I think maybe flipping over to the offensive side of the ball with Ben Powers leaving, this leaves a gap with left guard. And I honestly think it's interesting the repercussions it has across the whole line, because even though we're very worried about left guard now, I think there's a reason to have interest in right guard too, with Zeitler getting up there in age and maybe wanting a different contract, and who knows if we'll be the right people for that. So I think the line this year has a lot of interesting questions to be asked, and it's curious to me. I know they have Voorhees in their pocket for next year, but I'm curious if there's going to be anyone in the competition this year for left guard that maybe doesn't win it, almost looking ahead at them being a better option for right guard the year next year.
These guys aren't all around next year. So yeah. Simpson is a fourth-year player, so he'll have to be re-signed. I guess if things went really well this season, then Simpson wins the left guard role, works well with Linderbaum, cuts down on his penalties, which they're ungodly high. One of the most penalized players in the whole league. But even if everything went right, I think he'd have to be extended because he's a fourth-year player currently. Ben Cleveland is a third-year player. Next year he's a fourth-year player. If they show as little interest in getting him on the field as they did this last year, I don't even think he makes the team in year 4. I don't know why he would if you're at that point. Falalele is developmental player and still a developmental player. Led the team in sacks allowed in a very small number of snaps. Mm-hmm. So that doesn't look good. Sala, the new guy, the 6th round pick, they seem to have a belief in him. They're at least trying him there. And I think the other player that has been mentioned is Patrick McCary. But if you put him in the role at left guard, then you won't have him at left tackle when you need him. And McCary, there's no other backup at left tackle currently. The only other guy who might be a backup at left tackle, and I haven't heard it said yet, but the guy has the proper size and length for it, is Simpson. And I don't know how bad he is. I haven't really seen him. I really am interested to see him, getting to see him move a little bit. But he definitely has the length to play left tackle. And it might be possible that's one of the reasons why the Ravens like him. And if so, then he could win the left guard job and still be ready to play left tackle as the need arises.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be a very interesting position group to watch during the preseason. I think the number one thing I'm taking away from what you're saying, Ken, and I kind of agree with it too, is there's not really anyone penciled in at the moment. If I'm taking what you're saying correctly, as far as like the week 1 starter at the position.
Yep.
Yeah. Which is not a situation that is, foreign to us, right? I think, 2019 is sticking out in my mind, right? Well, that was Bozeman won the job, I think, before shifting to center in 2020, and there was a lot of discussion as to during the preseason who was going to take that. He ran away with it, obviously, but I don't even know who to really focus in and say like this guy is the guy we could see break out. I am slightly interested to see what happens with Cleveland this offseason, because I do agree with what you're saying. He hasn't been a big part of the Ravens' plans in his first 2 seasons in the league. That said, it would hardly be the first time we've seen one of these offensive linemen drafted, in the middle of the draft, that we hardly see at all, and then they just come out of nowhere and they're playing a lot of snaps and they price themselves out of. I mean, Ben Powers, the exact guy that we're talking about replacing before last season. How much we didn't see terribly much of Ben Powers at all. So it is a question that I wanted to pose to you about Cleveland, because I know that you study the offensive line more than anyone on this call right now. Are there traits in Cleveland, from your perspective, that could lead him to be, a Ben Powers, Ryan Jensen, esque player, one of these guys that gets unlocked in year 3 or 4 after really not showing very much at all in their first couple of years in Baltimore.
I think it's certainly possible. He's an enormous man. One of the things will be just what kind of shape is he in camp, and I've heard it's a lot better. I'm really looking forward to next week getting to see it, and hopefully it's a big change in body type because the Ravens need him to be in shape. We had 2 out of shape players. Michael Pierce, who was able to come back from being out of shape and play during the season, and Ben Cleveland, who came to the roster, and the Ravens actually almost poked fun at his weight on their roster list, moving up from 335 to 370. So that's not a good sign. I'll say this: Cleveland was a good inside-out pass blocker in college, definitely a better pass blocker than a run blocker. And it might be that he'd be an ideal pairing with Linderbaum at center. And the Ravens face a compound problem there that I wanted to find. It's similar to the defensive line problem that you're losing a guy and you have more snaps to cover. They're losing a guy in Ben Powers, who was one of the very best pass blockers in the entire league at left guard. And they're picking up whoever they put in that spot is not going to be as good a pass blocker, almost certainly, but also there's going to be more total pass blocking snaps. And so the Ravens are going to have to face more A-gap bombing from stunts, from blitzes, that will challenge the combination of Linderbaum and whoever. So let's say it's Simpson for a second. Length issues are going to give any kind of length, across the face of the guard play on stunts are going to give Linderbaum the worst problems because the player doing so will hit him on one shoulder with length. And it's not something he has an easy counter for. We hope he develops better ways to do it, but I'm very concerned about a new left guard really incenting opposing defensive coordinators to go after that left A gap as the Ravens' primary weakness, because it's otherwise a very continuous line.
Yeah, in some ways, this position group feels a lot different, almost kind of like corner, where in the years past, it almost felt like there was always a pool of 4th-round picks or undrafted guys who had shown enough, or there was enough excitement for that they could step into that role. I mean, we've had pretty much all of our left guard centers that have left for other teams. I think we're all kind of in that boat. I feel like if I had to put a number on it right now, I feel like Simpson would probably be the guy. I could see McCary in there as well, but I agree. I think he's the problem here is he's the James Hurst of this team. He's not the penciled in starter, but he's good enough at a lot of positions that you really don't want to lose that insurance for any of the position groups. But if we're looking at a guy who, if we're looking at getting the best 5 guys out there, while still having some sort of insurance behind, maybe McCary's it. I really hope not, but I guess I feel like if the Ravens are really desperate, I think McCary starts. But if they feel comfortable with someone else, I think that's probably the way that they're going to go.
I think that's probably a good call there. And McCary is a smallish offensive lineman, mm-hmm. and putting him next to Linderbaum is not the way I would do it. I'd want one of the Enormo, and all of the rest of them are basically huge. Faalele and Cleveland are 2 of the biggest men in the entire NFL. Saleh is way up there in terms of size. Simpson is a 6'4", 321, built exactly as you draw a guard up on the board, with plenty of length to go with that as well. The question with most of those guys is feet, and how are they going to be okay in there. The question with Simpson also is penalties. But with McCary, you introduce a size issue, and the Ravens haven't had a left guard center combination who had a real size problem since Gradkowski and A.Q. Shipley, and that did not go well in 2013. No. That was a very bad group. And it's funny because Shipley went off and had a decent career with the Cardinals, and I want to say he might have played almost a decade in the league as it turned out. It was remarkable, but he played a long time in the league. I'll look it up here.
I think so. Well, he came from the Colts, I think, before he came to Baltimore, right?
think that's right. Yeah, he played. Looks like 9 seasons. He might have been hurt for one in there somewhere, like 2018. 1 year with Indianapolis, 1 year Baltimore, another year Indianapolis, and then 4 years at Arizona, another year at Tampa. And he played 100. A.Q. Shipley played 110 NFL games and started 72.
Wow,
is that incredible? Or what?
Yeah.
I think the thing that gets me about this left guard problem the Ravens have is, like we were saying earlier, there's always a little bit more confidence going into the season, I think, where these players had a whole year. Like, I mean, Powers, he started 12 out of 13 games that he played in 21. So he had decent availability, and he showed a little bit. I do remember, though, we were all talking this time last year that he might get traded, like we thought like that. And then it was kind of crazy how well he ascended. I would say maybe the closest comp is Simpson, because he has actually started games for the Raiders before he came over. But like you said, I think he was a lot more questionable than Powers was at that point in his career. So you're looking at this very full of question, not very proven group of players. And I honestly, I didn't even bring up Falele for this position because I think it's absolutely not happening. It doesn't really make much sense to me at all. And the thing with McCary that I think is super interesting that Chris made me think about is if it happens week 1, it's total desperation and a very, very bad sign about all the depth, in my opinion. If it happens in the playoffs, that's spicy. That's interesting to me. What if they get decent play, but not great play, and in the playoffs they think that McCary's their best option? That I could see happening. Because you could still pivot, have him switch around if an injury were to happen. But I could honestly see a 2012-esque line shifteroo if none of these players emerge and then playoff time comes.
Yep, that would be very similar. The three-way switch is something the Ravens are so uncomfortable doing by their actions for all these years, is making multiple switches to cover for one change, which is one of the reasons why you don't want to have McCary out there playing left guard if you then have to switch your left guard to play left tackle and then move in another left guard. It's better to have a 1-for-1 change available, off to the side. It hasn't always mattered that way with Marshall Yanda, but it's mattered for a lot of other lesser players. And I think it makes more sense to have just a quality 6 man available there, or a quality 6, 7, and 8 who can fill in at 3 different positions if that's what you really want. But they're going to have to play the hand they have right now, because I don't think they're going to be able to pick up a lineman who's significantly better than Simpson, Cleveland, McCary, say, to come in and fill a spot. To get that kind of a player, if there's still a free agent out there, would be a lot. To trade for that kind of a player would require a talent surplus somewhere else that isn't obvious where they would get it, other than maybe Patrick Queen, if you want to trade him. But I really don't see how they would get another good offensive lineman at this point. So the cards they're dealt.
Yeah, I am definitely in agreement with what we see right now is likely what it's going to be. And, I think the track record of the Ravens speaks for itself. I think that someone in this group is going to surprise. The question will really just be, what's the full value you're going to get, and how much will that help the unit as a whole. But yeah, definitely one of the big position groups to watch this preseason for certain.
Last question I have before we switch to the last player is, what are our percent chances that this problem is determined / solved in the preseason and there's not a rotation week 1?
Okay, by injury or something, you're saying? By either injury or
I guess injury would be an interesting way for that to be solved. But I guess what I'm saying is, to simplify it, do we think week 1 there's going to be a rotation? Odds on that. I would say I think there's like a 60% chance there's a rotation week 1.
Yeah.
Better. I think there's a higher chance of it than not at this point that there's going to be rotation. Because, even in preseason, we might not find out. I will say, though, last year was a big tell. They didn't play Powers at all, and that was the tell that he was the guy. So if they do something like that again this year, I highly doubt it. But if they did, that would be a big tell for me. But I anticipate them all getting play and then trying to figure it out until the last minute. And even overloading into the season to try to see. And I mean, honestly, there's no better game to do it than Houston. You got the Houston Texans week 1. You can do some experimentation and then lock it in for week 2, because then you got a doozy with the Bengals.
I think it's a good bet. I think it's a very good bet, and they've done that at both tackle spots. They've done it at guard. There have been a number of times they've done it over the years. They've even done it at cornerback a couple of different times. So, it's definitely a possibility.
Yeah, and I think, like you just said, with the first week being Houston, obviously the games need to be played. I don't want to overlook an opponent, but I think there's a pretty high chance that functions as an additional preseason game where they're able to maybe not just at that position, Look, again, like I said, I don't want us to overlook an opponent, but I mean, like, there's a great
but
chance.
You just called it an additional preseason game.
He's done this for many years in a row, and he's not usually wrong. The first game, we usually trounce an opponent, and
this goes all the way back to 2019. When we started the podcast, our very first time that we did a game preview was for that Miami game, and I made the joke that this was essentially going to be an additional preseason game for the Ravens, and luckily I didn't get egg in my face. It did turn out, as we know, that huge blowout. But, I think in a game where you're expected to win by a lot, you're going to have opportunities to sub more guys in, give some guys extra playing time because, margin for error is less.
Good bet. If you guys had to handicap it right now, and let's say that the possibilities are Simpson, Saleh, Cleveland, and Field, we'll call it. Those are the 4. So could be Field, could include McCary or Fa'alele or anybody else who we don't know about yet. Give me percentages for those 4. Sorry, I don't mean to take you off track, guys, for your show.
No.
I got to write it down while you're doing it.
I love it.
Like 30, and then Saleh would be like 15, and then whatever the remainder is for the miscellaneous.
25 for Field.
Yeah.
Okay, say that again. You got Saleh at 30.
No. I have Simpson and Cleveland probably about the same at 30.
Okay.
Saleh would be like 15, and then Field would be 25.
Okay,
right?
Field 25. Okay.
I have a different take.
Go.
Mine is 31 Saleh, 30 Simpson, 29 Cleveland, and then 10% Field.
Wow. Okay.
I legitimately think it's going to be any man's position, and I have a hunch that they have, like Ken was saying, I think they have a little crush on Saleh, and they haven't been burned by him yet, so he's higher than Cleveland, but Cleveland I think has better raw traits. So, and then Simpson's just this unknown free agent guy. I mean, not totally unknown, but you know what I mean, just like new to the system.
Okay.
We got 1 to go here. Who is it?
1 to go. Oh man, I am too tired to do the percentages on the spot, but
You guys are all tech guys.
Yeah, I know. You can do this, Peter. I believe in you.
dude, if I don't want to talk about today, my brain is a charred after this week, man. But I will say I am. My hunch is, and this might be a little bit of a different take. I think it's going to be between Cleveland and McCary. I think they'll fall back on McCary if they're just because of his experience there and having a vet guy there. They already know what he can do in that position. Cleveland, I think that the raw traits are really enticing for the organization, particularly what he can do in the run game. We know that they love that. And they just have such a good track record of developing these guys that they draft in mid rounds. And like I said, these guys just they're doing nothing. And then all of a sudden they go in year 3 or 4 and they're vastly improved and they're pricing themselves out of Baltimore. I'm not saying that's a guarantee with Cleveland at all. I don't know enough about the offensive guard position to say that's even likely, but I just think, they know they've been drafting these guys in this position for a while. They know what traits they like. I'd imagine that they, when they drafted Cleveland, they thought that he could be a guy who could fit that mold. So, I think I'd put a slight edge to Cleveland for that, and then I think they'd fall back on McCary if he doesn't pan out, just due to his experience and having continuity with those guys who are out there.
Yeah, I like hearing you reason through it, but I didn't hear 4 numbers that I was looking for. So, you don't have to.
51-51.
Wait, what? That's 102.
Yeah, he's just proving the math's not his game right now.
50-49-1. There you go.
Okay, there you go. I'll say Simpson, Sala, Cleveland, Field, 40-30, 20-10. So I think Simpson is the favorite right now. I know a lot of other people don't think that, but one of the things, about the only reason that I really think that this problem will be overcome is the Ravens have a tremendous track record of developing and also rehabilitating offensive linemen. And if anyone can fix the problems Simpson had, it's the Ravens. And I believe he was in a terrible situation with the Raiders of they didn't really know and maybe didn't even care to fix him there. Or they probably cared, but they didn't know how, would be the more likely. John Simpson, 1,545 career snaps in Oakland over 3 years. It's a little less than a season and a half. 17 penalties. Okay, and then you look at the penalties and you say, well, okay, if it's all a bunch of false starts, it's a cost of doing business, whatever. 2 false starts, 13 holding penalties, and 2 personal fouls. Does not get much worse than that, because that means there were 15 of the 17 fouls where the defensive team was granted an option on the play or not. And he did have several decline penalties as well, which are effectively all drive stallers. So very, very, very bad track record for Cleveland. Hopefully they can clean that up.
So the last position I guess we want to talk about is wide receiver, but specifically Devin Duvernay. We saw him spend a lot of time in more gadget role on this offense, provide a little bit as a wide receiver early on this season before it seemed like an injury really stole the rest of his productivity for the rest of the year. The question I think we're kind of alluding to is, A, how much gadget stuff will there really be room for in Monken's offense? B, how often will a guy like Duvernay or Aguilar be able to break into the quote-unquote big three of Bateman, Odell, and Flowers for snaps? Assuming health, I'm curious to see your thoughts on how these 4th and 5th wide receivers are going to get deployed in this offense going forward. And let's take it from there.
Well, starting with the starting the season and the health comment, I think Bateman's not going to be ready to go probably not at all for week 1, but definitely not for a full workload from week 1. So I think we're going to see other players. I don't really know at this point whether it's Beckham or Aguilar. Neither of them is an ideal X receiver, but either of them could be cast into that role because there just isn't really anybody else. I think Zay is a Z. I think he stays over there. That's nice for memorization purposes. That's fairly easy. but he's a player that they really want to take the top off the defense. I think they want him to get a clean release off the line of scrimmage as much as he can. The Z receiver typically plays off the line of scrimmage, so it's the ideal spot to have him doing that. And it also leaves you open to use his gadgety goodness for motion plays, because you have to be off the line of scrimmage to go in motion. You can't be on the line of scrimmage. I know you guys know that. I just saying sure. for your things out there. But it's something that I think that the team doesn't really know what their fix is right now. I mean, it could be Tylan Wallace might be the best X on the field that they have currently, and he might start the season active and playing some. I mean, Duvernay's not an X by any stretch. He's also a Z, and I think he's a guy that we may see lined up all over this year, because he's obviously going to get reduced snaps with Zay out there taking his primary position. He's not the route runner. Zay's not that great a route runner, but Zay's a very sudden athlete who loses people with his suddenness, as opposed to throwing leverage at them that they read incorrectly and then making a move off it. I think that Duvernay is much more valuable to the Ravens as a gadget player. And if Monken is serious about continuing to stretch the field horizontally, I think he'll be used in that role. Number of places, line up in the backfield, motion, Z, wherever.
Yeah, I was going to say from my side, I feel like on one hand, I kind of like having more people in front of Duvernay because I felt that, he never kind of broke out as the guy who you'd want on the, first corner, second corner, even third corner. You kind of want to try to line him up on a linebacker or, one of the depth pieces, be able to make some plays from that matchup. So, moving him down the depth chart a little bit, you can still find opportunities for that in certain packages. It just won't increase his snap count. It might stay the same. It might decrease, probably decrease, assuming everybody else is healthy. But I think the benefit basically is just the offensive coordinator, right? I think at this point, I think I'm more confident in Monken to be able to scheme up plays for players rather than Roman. Scheme up plays for wide receivers, I guess I should say, not running backs, but you get my point. So I think it'll be good. Obviously, I think some of the guys behind, like, Prochet, we talked about, it's going to be a big stretch for him. He could barely see the field, even with Roman. It's going to be really hard to get him on the field. Wallace, I feel like I'd probably say the same. But I do think, for what it's worth, the first 6 weeks or so, I feel like we're really not going to know who's healthy. Even Odell, like, yeah, he's had a lot of time off, but, is he really ready? Still a little bit of a question mark. So there will be some opportunities early, I think. But over the season, I would probably not expect too much of a jump from him unless it was very situational.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Wallace is the guy who might really get some unexpected playing time out of the early health issues. I don't think Prochet is going to make the team as a fourth-year player. It just doesn't make sense to me. His option value is running out. He had a terrible year last year. He did have a pretty good year 2 years ago. So, even if the truth is somewhere in between those two numbers, I'm skeptical that the Ravens will find a way to be able to keep him on the field. I think it's much more likely that they like Wallace for his special teams play, and we'll bring him back instead.
Yeah, that's a good point as far as Wallace and special teams. I'd be absolutely stunned in his development if he's able to find his way on the field, though. I think they'd be much more comfortable using Odell as the X instead. I mean, it's just a better player, I feel like, at this point, unless Wallace has had an incredible growth. That's my anticipation. And also, I wouldn't be stunned to see Zay take some of those snaps too. Obviously, I think he will fit better as a Z long term, but I definitely could see him taking some position or some snaps there as well.
You expose him to press coverage if you do that. I'm not saying that all other teams are going to be willing to do that, but you certainly expose him to that. So it's much harder to get a free release for a smaller player like that. Yeah. Not that he can't do it. It's just it would be a challenge. Yeah,
for sure. I think it'll definitely be a challenge for him. I think that is my anticipation for him. Like if we're doing a good and great season for him next year, would be that he can take on that responsibility some, because that is how you really make your hay as a first round receiver, in my opinion. He can still be dynamic as well, because he's going to be on the field no matter what. You know what I mean, from a second wide receiver perspective. But I think you really need to see some of that ability to take on X snaps. I mean, even Prochet's played some X snaps in the past, so I think he definitely could do it.
Yeah, I think going back to Duvernay though, the bottom line is I think we are definitely going to see him get utilized in this offense. Ken, as you're mentioning, Bateman is probably going to need to be eased in because of the injury he's coming off of. Odell, we'll see how healthy he is. I'm not sure the last year that he played a full season. He's obviously had some injury concerns in recent years, not getting younger. Aguilar, I think, is interesting because, I mean, you look back at him, he's actually been has incredible availability for his career. But yeah, I mean, Zay Flowers, he's a rookie. He could obviously come in here and light it up. He could also have some struggles coming into the NFL. We saw even with Bateman when he did come in. Now, I know he was coming off an injury, so he was a little, he had to come up to speed with that. But, he had some games where he was good and other games where disappeared a bit. Some of that was due to quarterback situation too, late in that year with injury. But Yeah, I do think that Duvernay will find snaps on the field. I think that Monken, with what he brings to the table, is going to have some interesting ways that he wants to utilize him. But yeah, I think if you look at it, he's probably going to be fourth or fifth on the team as far as targets are concerned in ideal situation, as far as the stats are concerned. But yeah, I mean, it'll certainly be interesting to see where he's at. It's really hard to pin down exactly what he's going to be, and I think this is, we didn't really lead in with this, but what we went to end this on is looking at skill positions, and while not really much turnover here, what you do have turnover is the offensive coordinator. And of all the players on this offense, we were talking before the show, Devin Duvernay is really the most interesting as far as how is he going to fit into this new offense, because there's a lot of ways we wanted Greg Roman to utilize him that at times it felt like, were we really getting the most out of him? And now he's got new life with a new offensive coordinator. Can he bring out some more of his game that maybe was underutilized there? So I think another guy that's going to be really interesting to see early in the season, how is he getting mixed into the offense?
I'm looking forward to it. One of the things that we're not giving Duvernay enough credit for, I don't feel we are, is just how good his hands are. He's got by far the best hands on the Ravens team. The Ravens, one of their things with wide receivers, they've got a whole bunch of developmental things that have not worked out wide receivers, and a whole bunch of free agent picking that seems to ignore certain traits. But one of the big ones is hands. Occasionally they've gotten lucky and they've gotten a receiver who has really good hands, like a Bolden. But generally speaking, they don't seem to care about drop rate in the receivers he got. Nelson Aguilar is one of the worst droppers in recent times in the NFL. It really cuts into his completion percentage. And they have Duvernay, and he had exceptionally good hands last year. And they've had other guys. The guy who comes to mind, Chris Moore, who had a really good catch rate season. I think he might have been 20 of 25 or thereabouts one of the seasons a few years ago. But then every Ravens receiver otherwise, including Likely, is a high drop rate guy. And that's very scary to put all that together. It probably cuts into what Lamar is able to do just based on the total number of drops. But Odell Beckham is higher than the league average, and Likely is the second highest of tight ends. Aguilar was the second worst of wide receivers last year. Who am I missing here? Bateman, huge problems coming out of school with drops. It was really the one red X on his report card coming out of school. So they have a lot of problems with players who drop the football.
All right, I guess with that, we're going to wrap up the show. Thanks so much, Ken, for coming on. Let everyone know about your show.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, guys. Always fun to talk football with you. And you guys have always been regulars on my show, and I really appreciate all the contributions you've made to it. I'm at Filmstudy Ravens on Twitter. The show is available on filmstudybaltimore.com. If you're an older guy and you just want to hit play on a thing and watch it from your laptop, damn it, your desktop, not your laptop. And if that's what you want, you can do that. And if you know an old guy who maybe doesn't even know how to do that, go show him how to watch Film Study right off his laptop and right directly off the website. But for the rest of you people who do podcasts, and that's unfortunately not me yet, download from Apple, Spotify, or any of them, and you'll be able to find it. It's on all the major apps. And
Ken, are you on Threads yet?
I am not yet on Threads. How many? Do you already picked up 5,000 followers on Threads?
No, we have like 3. Okay. But yeah, it hasn't been. Business is not booming on Threads yet. But yeah, we're posting on Threads now too. So we'll see. We'll see where it goes. We'll see what happens with Twitter.
I got to do it. Now you guys are tech guys. What is the long-term future of Twitter versus Threads?
I mean,
man, we could have a whole nother podcast on this. I feel we had a pretty long discussion about this after our last recording.
Yeah, I feel like it's a lost love for me at this point. I loved Twitter, and now I'm barely ever on it. And I mean, it's just the business wise, it's not very viable at the moment. I think the beauty that Instagram ads are incredibly good. I mean, Facebook Meta, their ads are remarkably good. Something that Twitter never really quite solved. So I think that they'll be able to better monetize their users than Twitter was, and Twitter's still failing at it, right? So I think I do think that there's a decent chance that Threads is picks up and becomes the thing. Remarkable how many users they have. The social graph. The best part I love about it is they literally, Instagram was made years ago, and you found your friends by importing your Twitter list. Now, all those contacts are becoming their Threads lists years later, right? So, kind of interesting, the circle of life of tech. But we'll see. But yeah, I thought that Mastodon had a chance, and now I'm feeling like the nerds move, but that was about it. So,
and my counter to all that is I question if Threads offers enough to make a paradigm shift to actually completely take down Twitter. But I mean, everything you're saying, like I'd understand that, there's certainly some things that Threads has going for it that if it does pick up steam with the masses, certainly it could be the one. But I just question society as a whole making that mass migration from something as established as that. For sure.
Well, before we dabble in the accidental tech side of One Winning Pod, we'll wrap up. You can find us on Twitter and Threads at One Winning Pod. Email us onewinningpod@gmail.com. And we'll be back soon with more Ravens stuff as training camp unfolds. Go Ravens.